Proactive parenting, I'm just going to kind of go with some of my notes here. It involves employing procedures that are designed to prevent or interfere with problematic behaviors. That means you have to do it before the problematic behaviors occur. And in some situations, you know when problematic behaviors are going to occur. For some, it may be the grocery store. For some, it may be going to school. For some, it may be getting dressed in the morning, going to bed at night. As a parent, you know when some of those behaviors are going to occur. So proactive, you try and prevent those from occurring in various ways. So one of the ways to do it is to catch your child being good. And this is something that I really try and work on. If my son, who's 3, is in a room playing quietly, I want to make sure he knows that I notice he's playing quietly and he's playing appropriately. So I'll just drop in there and say, I really like the way you're playing so quietly. And that's another part of this that we'll get to it later, is when you're praising, to do so specifically. When you give instructions, do so specifically. So it's not just, oh, you're doing a good job playing. But with specifics, the same thing when you ask directions. We'll kind of address that. But a lot of times, when a child's playing and they're quiet, we don't want to interrupt them. They're being good, let's not interrupt. But they need to know that you appreciate that behavior and that that's what you look for when that's the kind of appropriate behavior you want them to engage in. So, part 1 of proactive parenting, catch them being good. And now that does require that you're kind of aware of the situation, that you know what's going on. And so you kind of have to keep, there are times you may not be able to do it all the time, but maybe there's a point when you can kind of, I've got a minute and I haven't heard any breaking glass or nobody's screaming or crying. Go in there and say, I really like the way you're playing with this toy in such a quiet manner. I like the way you're sitting still reading a book, whatever they're doing. That's the behavior you want them to engage in. Time in. Most people have probably heard of timeout. It's a removal from a situation, but for timeout to work, the person has to enjoy the behavior they're engaging in. Say they're working on homework and they hate homework, as a lot of students do, and you do something, go sit in the chair, but they just got out of homework. You just gave them what they wanted. So for timeout to be effective, it has to be, if they're playing with friends and you remove that from them, then that's going to make a difference. But for time in to be effective, it has to be a behavior they want to engage in. If you're doing something, let's say the example that I used, the dentist. Unfortunately, not a lot of people like going to the dentist, so we'll go with the assumption you don't like going to the dentist. It's the least favorite thing on your list to do. And then you have a job, and job's not your favorite thing to do, but you like it better than the dentist. You're at the dentist, about to go back, and your job call says, we really need you to come in. You're likely to leave the dentist and go to the job because the dentist is not rewarding at all. Now, in the aspect that, let's say you're spending time with your family, you're on vacation, your job calls and says, we really need you to come in. It's not really going to happen. Same request, but the behavior you're engaging in is more enticing, it's more appealing. That's where time in becomes effective. So for it to be appropriate, the behavior they're engaging in, you want to be appropriate, but you also want it to be enjoyable for them. The phrase, rich with positives, and some of that stuff we'll go into a little bit more. There's a book, and I had meant to bring the book with me, and I realized that, about halfway here today. The book is called SOS, Parent's Guide. Great book. I think it's not a terribly expensive book. I don't know if they have it here anywhere. They may have it in the lending library. I'm not sure. But this is where a lot of this information comes from, and it's very simply written. It's not written, from one professional to another. It's written to parents, and so a lot of this information comes from that, and some of it comes from other research. But there's an activity called parent-child interaction therapy, and what that is just the parent and the child interacting, giving them opportunities to interact together, and a therapist would look and see how they interact and help coach them, and coach the parent in more appropriate ways. One of the ways is the child's game. My son has created a game, he calls it the hug game. H-U-G, hug, like a bear hug. He loves it. And all it is he'll run around the room a couple times and you chase each other, and he'll stop, run over to the corner of the room, and you hug each other. That's it. As simple as that. He loves it. my job as a parent and to encourage this behavior, which it's fine. He's running in a space that's open, and it's great to, I mean, hugs for your children is always a good thing. So my job as a parent is to encourage that. Now, this is his game. This is a game he created. So where it would be wrong of me is to come in like, well, why don't we do it like this? Or what if we do it like this? Why don't we do it like this? And basically take that game that he created and he loves and just take it away from him. So with the child-directed portion, where the child leads, the parent, and this is kind of hard for us because we're like, well, you know, what if you did it this way? What if you did it this way? Well, you can't do that. You have to let the child lead. There's the DRIP, DRIP. When you're letting the child lead, D, describe appropriate behaviors. Oh, I like the way that you included this, or I like the way that you shared, or I like the way that you're doing this. So, again, you're not telling him or her to change anything. You're just saying, I like what you're doing. Or reflect on appropriate. Oh, I see the way that you did this. Or, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. You're stacking these up like this. Okay. I imitate appropriate play. And appropriate is a key word in all this. When they do something that's you don't have a problem with, that they're not going to get in trouble for, follow along with them. And one of the things with that too, and us fathers are probably the worst at this. The child builds a tower. As a man, we want to build it higher. I can't do that because that's not letting the child lead. If the child builds it 3 blocks high, you build it 2 blocks high. Make sure that let them build something better and let them know, like, wow, that's a very good tower. And then P, praise the pro-social, and that's kind of, again, if they're sharing, if they're including others. So when the child's leading, and that's something that you just, especially if your children have come up with games that they like to play, they've made up something, let them teach it to you and you play along. They've set the rules, and chances are during the game the rules may change 5 or 6 times, but you know what? It's their game. That's all right. So that's the child's game. Another portion is, and it says a little bit, antecedent control methods. Antecedents, it's a fancy word for saying whatever happens before the behavior. It's what comes before. So if you can change things that happen before the behavior, that might help to pacify things and to keep things from occurring. There's ways that you can do that. Ways, setting house rules. Bedtime is at this time. When you come home, you're going to do homework first, and then you're going to play outside, and we're going to have dinner. Setting schedules. It may be as simple as kids like to stick things in electrical outlets. Well, you may just put those covers on there and fix that problem. So there's a wide variety of ways to change the things that happen before behaviors. Routines is a big one. That's one thing that we try with both our children. They have a set bedtime, a set time that they eat, at least at feeding when they're infants. But setting routines, that way they know what's coming next. And I mean, as we get older, I'd be lost without a schedule, without my calendar. I wouldn't know. I'm like, well, what am I doing? I don't even know what day it is. Like the days when we have time off from school, I don't keep up with the calendar, so I don't know what day it is. Routines are ingrained in all of us, and especially with children, when they can't really make their own decisions, they rely on us to tell them what's next. So setting routines. Another component of that is how and when you give commands. But we'll kind of address that in a moment, but another portion also is when you give them choices, because children like choices, don't give them a wide open choice. What do you want to wear today? Because you're going to be there a while. It's just boys and girls, you're going to be there a while because either A, they don't care what they're going to wear, or B, it's just too many choices. So the option would be, do you want to wear this shirt or do you want to wear this shirt? They still have the power of choice, but it's just between these two things, so you've narrowed it down and sped up the process. So if getting dressed in the morning is a problem, instead of saying, well, what do you want to wear? Just say, as a parent, say, do you want to wear this or do you want to wear this? Those are your choices. So, and most children, not all, but most of them are going to choose from those two. You may want to do 3. It just depends. You know your children better than any of us, obviously, but 2, 3 choices at the most to give them opportunities to kind of make some decisions and feel a little bit of empowerment. Also, do you want to clean your room first or clean the playroom first? So When it's something that you know they need to be doing, again, give them those choices, knowing that the other is going to occur, especially if it comes to cleaning. And again, not you know, like, which one of these do you want to do first? Just a wide open. But narrow down the choices and make them specific. And that goes back, that's kind of the effective instructions. That's what I talked about earlier, the commands, giving explicit, very, very clearly stated with no wiggle room. Instead of go clean your room, say I need you to go upstairs or go over to wherever the room is, go to your room. I'd like you to pick up your toys first, put them in the boxes or put them in the playpen, whatever, then make up your bed. Explicit. And for some, it may be, I need you to go to your room and pick up your toys. And then once that's done, step number 2. For older kids, you might can give them 3 or 4 steps. But for the younger ones, you know, or my son's notorious for leaving his shoes on the floor. I need you to go put your shoes in the drawer where they belong, instead of just go put your shoes up, because to him, up is in his room. So he'll just throw them in his room, I did it. No, I need you to go put your shoes in the drawer where you got them from. So, specific. And again, obviously you wouldn't want to ask a 3-year-old those multi-step directions, so make sure that what you ask is something that they're capable of doing, age appropriate. And that also lets them know, okay, this is exactly what they want me to do. One of the things another thing we'll kind of address on is, like I mentioned initially, no is the first word that children learn. But what they don't understand is if parents are always telling them, no, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that, the reason they're doing so many of the things that you're telling them no is because, well, what can I do? And again, with this, giving effective instructions, you know, why don't you go play with this toy? Why don't you go play over here with this? It's something that you would rather them engage in. Kind of set the stage. Oh, okay, so Mom says it's okay for me to do this. Dad says it's okay for me to do this. I'll go engage in that. I like doing it anyway. And that way you're kind of helping them. You're not setting them up for a no. You're giving them the opportunity to say, okay, well, I know that they do want me to do this. And if you do have to say no, give them an appropriate behavior in its place, a replacement behavior. Now, I don't want you, you know, spitting at your sister. Why don't you just, you know, roll your eyes at her instead of something? And you may not want that either, but at least, I guess, rolling eyes, if not in anger, not at your parents, is something to replace it with. Another portion, embedding. And I guess when I did this was, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago that I did this. And I think it's still appropriate, but I don't know, I don't watch Barney, but Barney had the cleanup song. And it works. That's what embedding is. Embedding is engaging in a behavior, or pairing a behavior with something that kids like doing, and most kids like singing. So if you give them, I mean, it's the alphabet song, and it's a good way to learn the alphabet, but Barney's cleanup song. They're singing while they're doing something that they don't enjoy. So you've got 2 things going on simultaneously. Now, that's the trick. It has to be something that can be done simultaneously. And so embedding is to give them a task, but pair it with something that they enjoy. And again, Barney's cleanup song is just a good example of one of those things. And some of this, if your kids catch on, some of it could be, you tricked me. Well, yeah, but it worked. You know, I got you doing what I needed you to. One of the things is, with the embedding, you have to get the child to engage in something that he or she likes, be it the singing song and then the cleanup song, and then while they're doing that, roll them into the next phase. And that kind of goes into the next point, the behavioral momentum. Kind of that the snowball, you know, starts off little and just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it really, you know, it takes a lot more to stop it. Well, that's what behavioral momentum is. You start them on something that they're likely to engage in. You know, well, I need you to, maybe the end result is eating the green peas on the plate. They've got other foods that they like. You start them off, okay, well, eat this, and then eat this. So you start them off on behaviors that they're likely to engage in, and then every now and again you throw in one of the things they're not going to do. Okay, now I need you to eat a green pea. That's a very simple example, but the instructions I have, or not the instructions, but the definition, it involves establishing a chain of high probability, the ones that they're going to engage in, the ones that they're likely to do, And low probability. So it's a sequence of things. It's low probability of things that they probably wouldn't do just on their own. You begin with several of the likely behaviors. So you get that momentum going up, like, okay, I can do this, and then you throw in one of the things they don't like. It's like, well, I might as well go ahead and do it. So that's kind of what that embedding is too. It's pairing those things that they don't like to do. When this is building up the momentum, it may not be simultaneous, but it's getting them, helping encourage them in the right direction to get those things in there that they may not do on their own. Any questions so far about the first portion, the proactive?
Maybe just an example of the last thing you talked about.
The embedding?
No.
Or no, the behavioral momentum?
Mm-hmm.
Can I give an example? Or am I?
Yeah.
Yes, if you do.
Okay. I think this is an example of what you're talking about, but my daughter came home with a stack of work that was unfinished. And she loves to be outside. She loves to climb trees. So I said, well, we'll go outside. And she's like, oh. And I said, well, we'll go outside, okay? Let's try it. So we went outside with the clipboard and with the work that she had to do. And what I would do is I divided the sheet up, and she loves to run and play. So I said, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to go see that tree out there. I want you to run around the tree and then come back, and then we'll do this half of the page. And so each time she did half of the page, she'd be like, okay, can I go run now? And I'd be like, yes, yes. We got 5 worksheets done. And not only that, but exercise stimulates the brain. So she didn't know this, but I had her brain is stimulated because she's, doing the movement and doing something that she loves to do.
That's perfect.
Is that
Yeah, no, that's
and the momentum was going because we kept longer than she'd ever really work, because we divided it up with that.
that way, and the good thing about that, and it's not, because if you just sit down and like, we're just going to do homework, it's like, but if you pair it with that, and that's a great, literal momentum,
She got faster too. Just kidding, she did.
That way it's, well, I know I've got to suffer through this, but then I get to do something I want, and it kind of lessens the I guess the fear aspect, or just the dread that kids have. But that is a very good example. I like that. Anything else? Okay. Reactive parenting. This is, more often than not, we're going to react. Just because some things require reaction, and some things we don't get to catch on the front end. Ideally, the more you can catch on the front end, the more behaviors you can strengthen and encourage at the beginning, the better. And that's not going to happen all the time, and that's okay. But reactive it can be, there's ways to do it to help increase the behaviors that you want to see, and unfortunately there's also just knee-jerk reactions, which we're all guilty of. One of the reactive is this positive reinforcement. Positive is supplying something to encourage behavior that you want to see. Some of these other things are kind of, in a way, positive reinforcement, like we talked about, the catching being good and giving them, explicit instructions, telling them what you want to do. That's in a way positive reinforcement. But a definition is positive reinforcement is rewarding or strengthening behavior by presenting some desired stimulus. However, it also works for problem behaviors too. We're wanting to use it for the good behavior. So when a child engages in a good behavior, and you know what the reward may be, that I really like the way that you play quietly with your sister, or I'm very proud of you today for bringing home or not getting in trouble at school, for not getting any codes, whatever the case may be. That may be the positive reward they need. It may be, and that's where it comes back to the functions behavior. If a child's engaging in behavior because they want toys, and you just tell them good job, that's not going to cut it, because they want stuff. Now, obviously, we want to wean them from that and kind of get them to where they like to praise better, because praise is free. But that's why you have to kind of know, why are they doing this? Because, again, if they're doing homework and you send them to timeout, well, you just reinforce the behavior. That's positive reinforcement in a sense, because you gave them what they wanted and reinforced the behavior to land them in timeout. So next time it comes time for homework, guess what they're going to do? They're going to do whatever it was that got them into timeout in the first place, so they just sit there. So that's why it's got to be careful with the positive reinforcement. You got to kind of have an idea of why they're doing the behavior and what's reinforcing, so that you can reinforce the ones you do want to see. Now, another aspect of reinforcement is differential reinforcement. Differential is just, it's altering it, it's changing it, it's making the reinforcement fit whatever the behavior is. Now, and not only that, it's also reinforcing the behaviors you do want to see. So if they're engaging in those behaviors you do or don't want to see, you reinforce the good ones, the pro-social, the desirable behaviors. Now, for this to work, though, the behavior that you want to see, it has to be incompatible with the problem behavior. It can't be something that they can do both of. So you have to reinforce a behavior that just does not work with the other behavior. A loose example: your child cries for attention, and I'm not talking about a baby. I'm talking about a child, elementary age child, cries for attention, and you don't want them to keep crying because there are other ways to get attention. So when a child's crying, it's usually very difficult for them to talk. They may get out some sounds, but it's not talking. So you want to encourage talking, knowing that if they're talking, they really can't be crying. So that's something you want to reinforce, the talking. So if they're crying, you might say, I'm sorry, I need you to talk to me. I need you to use your words. Please tell me what happened. Why are you upset? Why are you crying? What do you need? And then once they start to talk and not cry as much, then you attend to them. Then you give them the attention. Okay, now that I can understand what you're saying. So that you want them to think, well, the crying's not going to get me the attention I need to talk. And it may be that you just have to let them cry until they're ready to talk. And that's something that we'll kind of address here in just a second with the selective attention. Does anyone have teenagers?
Yes.
Do they hear everything you tell them?
No.
They may be listening, but they don't hear. It's that selective hearing. Well, the selective attention is the same thing. It means you pay attention to only certain behaviors. And it may be that and not that you're just completely ignoring things, but as far as the child knows, you're only paying attention to certain ones. And this kind of goes back to some of the other stuff that the child thinks you're paying attention to behaviors because all they know is you only say something when they're doing what you want them to do. So, well, if that's getting their attention, then maybe I need to do more of that because that gets their attention. And especially with kids, a lot of times what they want is parent attention or adult attention. And if you give them the attention when they're behaving in ways that you want, well, they're going to learn pretty quickly that, let's see, if that gets their attention, then I'll just do that some more. Yeah, it was easy. That's all I had to do. I didn't have to throw a fit in. So what the selective attention also involves is planned ignoring. And that's something that can be pretty tough. But it's planned, meaning if my child engages in this behavior, I'm going to ignore it. And now sometimes those behaviors are a lot easier. Your child's having a tantrum at home, throwing a fit, lying down the floor, kicking, screaming. At home, that's easy to ignore. Well, I say easy, it's easier. At school, at the grocery store, at church, it's a little bit different. One of the things that we kind of talked about when we had the session, when I did the session for my thesis, was if grocery stores are a problem, when you go into the grocery store, again, going back to those rules, those antecedent controls, setting up things before they occur, you set down the rules. If you behave in such and such manner, we're going to go out to the car. And you have to be, as a parent, have to be ready to just leave the buggy there, grab your child, and go out to the car. And it's not easy, but that's another thing is that consistent follow-up. Same thing if you do decide to use timeout, consistent follow-up. It's not just saying you're going to go to timeout if you don't change it and then never go to timeout. Consistent follow-up needs to occur. So with a planned ignoring, you have to be prepared for what you're going to ignore and the extent you're going to ignore it. That extent that's probably the toughest part. If you ignore your child for a while who's crying and screaming, wanting attention, what do they tend to do? They get louder, or they get more, whatever, more animated. They're making a bigger scene. And I use it. It may be an over exaggeration, but it's an easy example for us to understand. plan ignoring, you're going to ignore those behaviors because that's not the behaviors you want to see. Now, one of the things they teach with toddlers, infants in cribs, children, I mean, their only aspect of communication generally is to cry. Now, you're not going to squash that, but one of the things that they say is that while the child's crying, you wait outside the room, and then when they stop, even if it's just to take a breath, for that moment that they stop, that's when you go in. Because if you go in when the child's crying, they learned, well, that's how I get parent here, so I'm just going to cry. And, oh, it's taking longer, so I guess they didn't hear me, I need to cry louder. So that's something that to work on, just with a simple example with an infant. You know, when they're crying, you know, you're there waiting outside the door, and then once they stop, just for that moment, even if it's, you know, to catch their breath, and they've got that little quiver voice where they just quit crying and they're trying to breathe, go in there. That way, it's, and you know, you're thinking, well, that was just half a second after they were crying. They're gonna, but they don't. They focus on, they're here now, and I was doing this right now. This is what, you know, I was quiet and got them here. So that's kind of that planned ignoring. Again, with that planned ignoring, you have to go back to some of that child's game thing that, you know, you say they were playing with a friend and they were playing appropriately. In the midst of it, though, you know, maybe they tripped their friend or they injured their friend. So, and not that it was necessarily they were being mean, but it happened. You want to focus on the things that they did right and encourage those things. And if it's not something that caused bodily harm, so I guess the tripping might have been a bad example, but if it's something that didn't cause bodily harm and it's something that you know that you can ignore, do that. Because a lot of times kids, again, if they're engaging in something for attention and you give them attention for that behavior, if they're yelling and screaming for attention and use any attention that you give them, you know, not even if you say, yes, what do you want? I mean, that's obviously, you know, reinforcing, but if you just tell them, would you please be quiet? Well, guess what? You just gave them attention. And if that's what they were after, well, they know how to get your attention. If you yell at them or even, you know, send them, that's, for some kids, that's attention. They don't care what kind of attention, it's attention. So it goes back to those 4 functional behaviors, why it's important to kind of know why, the why. Yeah, I don't think we'll do this.
You know how this happens with the teenagers? Have you guys had it where you tell them to do something and they just start grumbling about it and complaining?
Doing the dishes.
Yes, it was doing the dishes. That's the perfect thing that this just happened to me. And my son, so I say, I want you to do the dishes. So he just starts complaining and complaining. And if I talk to him and say, you know what, there's not very many dishes, even if I just try to tell him that the glass is only, you know, it's half full, it's not bad, he just goes off and grumbles some more. But if I completely ignore him, if I just ignore him, and he'll start doing them, and then as soon as he starts doing them, I come back and say, you are doing a wonderful job doing the dishes. Thank you so much. But I have to ignore the grumbling until he gets started doing it. It's the same kind of thing where you're not paying attention to the crying. If I pay attention to the crying or the grumbling, it just grumbles more.
Because he's got your attention. That's
and he loves my attention. So I wait, and then I say,
and
fabulous job on the dishes.
And that's definitely a good, easy thing to ignore. Grumbling, I mean, it's annoying anyway, so it's, you know, it's like, whatever.
And you can leave the kitchen.
Yep. 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 And with the older kids, it's even easier to do so, because grumbling is probably more prevalent.
Yes.
Than, so we kind of talked about the planned ignoring. Extinction. Extinction is when that goes away, and that's what you want. You want it to go away, but there's something called extinction burst, which is right before that behavior goes away, it's about to get really intense. Now, if you happen to, your planned ignoring is just, you're done, and you go and you acknowledge them at that point, next time they want your attention, they're going straight to that behavior. And of course, you know, in all this, there's no perfect science. So the extinction burst occurs, and then they just realize this isn't working. Then you've won. For that time, they may try it again, but typically, research has shown that once they tried it, once they pushed the limit and it didn't work, they're going to lessen because, well, obviously that didn't work. I don't have anything else more than that. So, but it's not easy. It's not easy to refrain from giving them attention or giving them whatever they're after when they're just pushing all the buttons. In the example of when you go out to the grocery store, if that's the case, you know, you say, okay, if you do this, this, or this, we're going out to the car. And if they do this, or this, that's it. You don't have to say anything. You've already set it. You've already set the ground rules. You take them out. You don't have to say anything because you set the rules and they've broken them. So you abide by your own rules and take them out. One of the last things, tolerance for delay. Teachers have this down to a science because they have to, because they have 20-something kids in a classroom. You've got one kid over here calling on you, and one kid over here calling on you, and one kid over here calling on you, and obviously as a teacher you can't be 3 places at once, or as a parent. So what you tend to do is, I'll be there in a minute. And you may want to practice this. You may just be sitting there, you know, you may be reading a book and your child's calling you, and you very well could get up and go see them. But if you want, and there's if it's an emergency, then just throw this right out the window and you go to them. But if they're just, you know, they're like, if they can't find a toy, if it's something fairly petty, when you have an opportunity to encourage this, practice it. You know, I'll be there in just a minute, or I'll be there in 5 seconds. I'll be there in just a second. But make sure you go, because if you can encourage that at a time when it's really not that important. There may be some time when they think it's important, but it's not. But you are stretched out in other places. Then they're used to that. They're used to, you know, I'll be there in just a minute, and then once you're done, go to see what they need. They say, and this doesn't always work, but if the child can see you, you know, you hold up your hand to signal, you know, I acknowledge your presence, hold on just a second, and then you turn to them and you address them and say, I'll be there in just a minute. So that way it's not just like they don't think you're just dismissing them. And I know sometimes the hand gesture may be a dismissal, so maybe you want to finish what you're doing and then turn to them and give them some attention and say, I'll be there in just a minute. That's the tolerance for delay, and it's as much for your own sake as it is for them, to let them know that I know that you're here, I know that you need something, give me just a minute to finish what I'm doing. It's kind of like that game, red light, green light, if any of you've ever played that, where you get 2 groups, they stand on either side of a room, and they say green light, and everybody runs, and they say red light, you stop. It's that sort of thing. So I know you need my attention, hold on a second, and then when you can give them their attention, they have the green light. Just a minute is probably the easiest thing. It's supposed to give them a specific time, because some kids will sit there and, well, it's been 30 seconds, you're not here, you're late. So a lot of the stuff that is taught, you know, like I said, some of the kids may think, you know, if they catch on to some of these things, they're like, wait, you're trying to trick me. Maybe, but it worked, you know. But most of this, and this isn't saying that necessarily that all misbehaviors that kids engage in is the root of parents' problems, because that's not the case at all. But if there's easy things that we as parents can do to help prevent some of those behaviors or to help limit some of those behaviors, then let's try.